Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mythological Africans podcast, where we read and talk about stories from African mythology and folklore. I am your host, Helen Tunde. Hello, friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Mythological Africans 2025. If you're a longtime friend, thank you for sticking around with us all these years. And if you're new, welcome to the community. Mythological Africans, or MA as I call it, is a corner of the internet where we talk about mythology and folklore from the African continent, using stories and ideas to make sense of the world that we live in. And as I always say in introduction posts, my intention with the platform is to create a space in which Black and African people, but also people from all over the world, can explore and celebrate the African experience of wonder and enchantment and mystery as captured in myths and folktales. And to do this in the context of the wider human experience of wonder and enchantment and mystery. And I emphasize the connection between Black and African stories to the wider human story because I believe that by connecting African stories to stories from around the world, we really can remind ourselves of the fundamental truth of our interconnection. Speaking of interconnection, guys, the world is wild right now, and I don't even have the words to truly express my thoughts about it all. And, if you follow my personal account on Twitter, I've been, putting a bit out there about some of the things that are going through my head. But I truly question the wisdom of having too solid an opinion on anything right now. But as I told a friend recently, this is all leaving me with a hunger and a thirst for stories that are truly reflective of the full length and breadth and depth of the human experience. So I want to promise that MA will remain a haven from the madness of it all. And so, with that in mind, here's an overview of what you can expect from MA this year. Something that becomes increasingly clear and urgent to me as I immerse myself into mythology and folklore from the African continent and elsewhere is that you simply cannot divorce mythology and folklore from geography, history, and the human psyche. And this is so for the simple fact that these stories were and continue to be crafted specifically to make sense of and help us as humans relate better with the world and with ourselves. And this is not to say that one ignores scientific reality. For example, I come from Cameroon and I lived through Mount Fako's eruption in 1999. And Mount Fako is another name for Mount Cameroon, which is one of the active volcanoes on the African continent. And, knowing that indigenous Bakure people's folklore, and the Bakure people are the people whose homelands are on the slopes and the surrounding area of Mount Cameroon or Mount Fako. So knowing that their folklore explains Mount Fako's eruptions as the mountain god Efasamoto rousing himself to seek out his wife Liengu Lamwanja, who lives in the sea, the Atlantic Ocean, which is nearby, didn't make the experience any less terrifying. So the point of looking at mythology and folklore is not to, lose touch with reality. But I do wonder if there are aspects of that story which, if I and others had been more familiar with, might have clued us in to what was about to happen. It's a very small fraction of the world's population who lived through that experience. But if you happen to be one of the people who were there for that eruption, there was a lot going on, which I wonder if the folklore of that mountain, of that region, had been more prevalent in people's minds, we might have been a bit better prepared, because it is a well-known fact that for generations and centuries and millennia, humans have encoded important observations about natural cycles into folktales and riddles and poems and proverbs. So the intersection of folklore and geography will be a main theme this year for MA's episodes. And as a part of this, I want to explore more of the work of Libyan writer Ibrahim Alkoni. And if you remember, last year we spent quite a bit of time with his work. We read Al Majus, or The Animist, which is tagged as the Tuareg epic. Ibrahim Al-Koni is from Libya, as I mentioned, but he's of the Tuareg people. And this book is really a compendium of Tuareg beliefs and folklore and ideas and philosophies. And it's an exquisite read. It's a massive book. So if you want to read it, Godspeed to you. But it was really an enjoyable read. But I want to do more of that this year, and I want to delve more into his work because he has a way of using his thorough understanding of Tuareg folklore, especially as relates to the Sahara Desert, which has been the home of the Tuareg people for centuries. And that's changing recently, but that's been their historical reality. So he has a way of using the history and the folklore of the Tuareg people as a portal into the world of geography and folklore. And personally, I don't think anybody else on the African continent is doing it like him. So we're going to use Ibrahim Al-Koni's work as a portal into this exploration of the world of folklore and mythology and geography. So the land masses, forests and rivers and oceans, how that all comes together. But we'll also spend some time exploring the connection between folklore and history. And this, I suspect this will be a tricky one because there is a way mythology and folklore gets fed into building national and tribal, using that word loosely, tribal narratives, which in the case of the African continent, I sometimes wonder if that does more harm than good, but that's my opinion. So either way, we'll look at how historical events have fed into folklore and vice versa, and you can all make your judgments about the outcomes. Folklore and personality is another dimension we'll spend time in. And this again is building on some of what we did last year, but also on the reason why I started MA to begin with. Because if you're familiar with the discussions from all over the world about psychology and spirituality, then you're probably aware that mythology and folklore is woven through these fields, right? And you look at just Jungian analysis at its core, there's a lot of mythology in there. But then in many cases, the stories and ideas that have been well studied and thoroughly analyzed and contextualized don't include mythology and folklore from the African continent. And this is changing. This has definitely changed somewhat over the last couple of years. But in my humblest of opinions, there's not nearly enough that has been done. So I'll be doing my own little part in my own corner of the world to see what this is all about. And for this, I'll be using folklore mainly from Francophone Africa. And this is because I am just utterly fascinated by the cultural systems of human growth and development from this part of the continent, mainly because they have produced, again, in my opinion, some of the most influential figures in African legend. Think Sundiata Keita, Nyenenga, and Abraha Poko, and others. And it's kind of unfortunate because I talk about Francophone Africa, but that's a colonial artifact, right? What underlies that are the peoples that fall under that umbrella of Francophone Africa. So we'll really be looking at the folklore of, the Malinke, the Dogon, the Akan, who are not from Ghana, and other African peoples who were colonized by the French and so have adopted French as a national language. But there's a lot to dig into there. There's a lot in a way that they organize their communities, their cultures, and how that helps in human development, which I find very fascinating. So we'll be looking a bit at that. And interwoven into all of this will be an ongoing exploration of how African mythology and folklore shows up in modern African literature. I really enjoyed the readings we did last year. We read a few books. We read Shinto by Jennifer Mukumbi from Uganda. We read some works by Usman Sembene. We read some works by Ibrahim Al-Koni, as I already mentioned. We read some good old Chinua Achebe, because you just can't not do that. We read Sonny Labutansi. So I want to do more of that this year. And there's a bit of an underlying selfish motive here because I desperately need to read more African literature. So this is my way of setting myself up to do more of that. As usual, we'll have the quarterly essay, starting with one coming up for Black History Month, February, in which we'll look at what we are remembering and forgetting from what African trickster tales communicate about the relationship between individuals, communities, and authority figures, especially in the context of who gets access to resources. And this ties again into some of the thoughts I've been having recently, just about world events and how we as Black African people show up in all of this. So, but the main event of this year, right, will be the launch of our very own MA book, the Watkins Book of African Folklore, on March 11th. And I've been going on and on and on about this book, guys. It's a book that I wrote, which brings together explorations that we've done since Mythological Africans launched in 2020. It has three sections, one focused on creation myths and foundation legends, one focused on human institutions and relationships, and one focused on animal tales, but not the usual animals that you'll see in African mythology and folklore. So, and it comes with commentary that situates the stories in the historical context. And what this means is that you get a sense of when and where these stories were first documented and how they've evolved over time. So there is a lot of commentary about their meaning and significance and how they relate to folklore from around the world. But there is also a good chunk of the emphasis on who documented the story and how it has evolved over time. So last I checked, the book, the Watkins Book of African Folklore, was at number 3 on Amazon's list of new releases for African literature, which honestly, I don't even have words. So thank you. And I'm sure you guys are just sick of hearing me talk about this, but you're just going to have to hang in there for a while longer because there is more. I have a couple of book events and talks coming up, starting with a conversation hosted by the truly awesome folks of Carius Books and More, Atlanta, on March 6th, with the very esteemed Dr. Falami Devo. And Dr. Falami Devo is a womanist, a healer, a women's group facilitator, a photo artist, and a poet. And I am particularly excited about this talk because our stories as Black African people have always been a means through which we navigate a world that is not sensitive to our realities. So I'm really looking forward to the roads that this conversation will walk. And if you're in the Atlanta area, I hope to see you there. I'll also be talking shop and signing books at Half Price Books, Dallas, Texas, on March 12th. And I'll be doing an online event with the lovely folks of the Watkins Bookstore on March 13th. So publication day is March 11th. On March 6th, we'll have an event in Atlanta. On March 12th, we'll have an event in Atlanta, in Dallas, not Atlanta. And then on March 13th, we'll have an event online. And you can reserve your spot or buy tickets for these events on the Mythological Africans. So not the Mythological Africans, on my personal website events page. So helenday.com/events is where you can get tickets. And if you go to the Mythological Africans Twitter account or the Mythological Africans Blue Sky or Instagram, basically Mythological Africans social, you should be able to get a way to reserve your spot or purchase a ticket for any of these events. So let's end here for tonight, friends. I'm so very glad to be here with you, here and now, and just truly grateful for your time, for your attention, and your support. And next week, we'll get right into the swing of things. So follow and subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you as always for listening. I'll see you next week.